We can define queer theory quite helpfully through looking at its history, and bearing in mind that it comes out of activism, and so that it has its roots in activism, in AIDS activism more specifically, coming out of the 80s and then moving into the 90s. So in that respect, queer theory attends to identity politics, in a sense, identity politics specifically tied to gender and sexuality. And then the theory bit of the queer theory develops through the 90s and the early 2000s and tries to put that into a framework. So to give us a framework to analyze how gender and sexuality work in all kinds of different contexts, really. With any theory in literature, it's really important that we don't impose the theory on a text, so that we don't say, okay, well, I'm going to sort of look for the queer theory in this text. But what queer theory does is it makes me maybe more aware of those moments in the text where the certitude of the text is actually unstable, and then to think about how that generates meaning. So how meaning is maybe generated out of uncertainty and instability and unknowability and unintelligibility, to use Butler's terms. So that's how it figures in literature, I think, or how it can be very productive in literary studies. Well, in my thesis, one of the things that I try to do is to look at the convention of the romantic triangle. So the triangular relationship of usually one couple, and then there's a third person, and somebody's erotically involved with that third person, and to think about how that can be quite normative, the way that works, and especially because we often know in a text what the relations are, and the characters know the relations. And so I try to do a queer reading of that triangle, and I look at love triangles in Jeanette Winterson's fiction, and think about how those love triangles, those constellations, somehow queer the love triangle because they are uncertain. So because the relations between the different points in the triangle are uncertain or ambiguous. So maybe we can see them, but we can see a number of different things. And then how do we bring those together? And how that then means that actually the identities of the characters are troubled because we don't quite know what their gender or sexuality is or how it relates together. So that would be an example from my thesis. If you came to me and said, give me one text, I would probably say Look at Critically Queer by Judith Butler, which is interesting for a number of reasons. So one is that the whole book is a response to critiques of her first book, Gender Trouble. So it is itself engaged in a dialogue, and it actually gives you the other voices as well. So you get a bit of an idea of the debate happening at the time. It also gives you a very good reading of that reclamation of the term. So how has this functioned, and where does it fail, actually? But it's short, and it's easily available. I think that's a very good starting point. In the workshop, the way that I try to approach it is to look at that tension between activism and theory. So to approach the notion of queer theory through that, what we might consider to be a contradiction, actually. So activism is something about political agency, and then theory is something that we think about in our offices and doesn't really have any impact. So so in the workshop, we try to think about how they can come together and how they actually work together to achieve a critique, essentially. So a critique of identity and of the world as it is today.